Hello from London. We're not in Oslo as it was initially planned, but I'm extremely happy and grateful for making this conference happen through this online platform. My name is Olga Ntenta and I'm an experimental scenographer. Contemporary thinker Judith Butler suggests a new conceptualization of the body, a new ontology. This ontology cannot be perceived as an entity that is not affected by others, such as norms, social, political, technological organizations. Simultaneously, the body is also complicit to their development and function. End quotes. The body is outside itself, in the world of others. In a space and time it does not control. And it does not only exist in the vector of these relations, but as this very vector. The body in the vector of these relations. Based on her quote, if we consider those others as social, political, technological forces, they will look somehow like those three vectors. Then, by adding them, we will get the vector of these relations, the resultant vector. The body as this very vector. Here, she suggests us to pay attention into this resultant vector, in a sense that if we were placing it under a microscope, we could identify that the body of the individual is a part of this resultant vector. This visualization of Butler's concept suggests that the body is located somehow inside those forces of others. The body is interfacing those forces in an extreme proximity and at the same time is enclosed into them. This observation leads to a design-speaking idea that those forces of others can be something that is on and around the body. In practice, the idea of the costume. Fate, in Greek tragedy, is a theme suggesting that everything in human life has been predecided by divine forces. An important representative of this genre is Oedipus Rex, where the conception of premeditation on human life is very explicit in the tragic story. I argue that there are parallels between what the ancient Greeks called fate and what Butler describes as the world of others. For this reason, I will re-explore the story of Oedipus through the conceptual lenses of Judith Butler, by using the idea of the costume as a metaphor. As those forces of others enclose the human, the costumes that I'm looking for should be able to cause physical control and restriction on the body. For this reason, the creative process for my costume design is based on improvisation and follows more the idea of thinking and designing through the materials and their engineering properties rather than speculate designs mentally and then realize it. For Giocasta, I used the material spacer fabric, an industrial insulating material. By exploring its engineering properties, I discovered that if you pass wire or string through its body, it gives you a variety of possibilities to shape it. Choosing one of those functions, I reformed it into a type of dress that restricts mobility and vision. For Oedipus, big metal springs are connected directly on his feet as a form of footwear that disrupts body balance and mobility. This was a result of an active physical engagement with the springs. Now, the same idea of thinking and designing through the materials, I suggest that can become an improvised method for performance design in itself. How? Precisely by consciously staying longer in the creative process and testing prototypes, in this case costumes, within a performative framework, as Simon Donzer writes in his book Scenography. What I found in the case of my costumes was that the movement in performance is generated as a direct result of the responsive shared agency between the costume and the body. When Oedipus makes a step, the shape of his body changes and arcs. At the same time, his whole body is vibrating. Giocasta's arms are locked into the one sleeve of the dress, and her vision is disrupted by the unusual large collar. The dress dictates her movement. The embodiment of restriction that is now performed through the improvisation helps us as audience think about the condition of the precarious. Especially upon their encounter, we see two bodies trapped in their individual suffering, but their suffering is becoming more explicit because it is stated in relation to one another. Bodies and eyes are naturally synchronized in a choreography. There is a sense of empathy. Body language shows intention, a desire to come closer and touch one another. This observation takes us back to Butler's suggestion about the body as this very vector. There is an intention stated by the suffering body. After a while, this intention is heading towards to become a decided action. Oedipus decides to take the risk and remove his hand from the bar and head towards Jocasta. Although she is not safe, she decides to lift her arms towards him. The two bodies indeed managed to touch one another. They acted upon their precarious situation. They got to discover and understand their restriction and work with it. This is a very helpful observation regarding precarity. We see ways of coping mechanisms. We see perhaps hope. Precarity, like tragedy, seems to be properly pessimistic, but it is a hopeful, affirmative pessimism, as opposed to a hopeless, vapid idealism. Quoting Simon Critchley. I argue that we can go deeper into this complex question by exploring further costume's performativity. A suggested way of doing so is keep improvising by employing additional scenographic parameters, such as materials that transform costumes, or the element of sound as material that has agency, or by altering spatial conditions and audience's positions. So, doing something that scientists would call a parametric analysis. Thus, I suggest a parametric analysis as a scenographic tool, as a dramaturgical strategy. Concluding, I embrace very much the idea of trusting materials' agency for the exploration of philosophical concepts. Also, I invite all to open up to unusual to costume design materials that acquire physical agency, materials that are difficult. Thanks very much for your attention. I'm looking forward to meet you at the conference and discuss more in depth about costume and its agency. If you wish to contact me earlier, please feel free. Find my email below. See you soon!